In America today, many Black people are left wondering where their ancestors truly came from. Unfortunately, government records and official institutions have done very little to help answer this question. In fact, these systems have often made the confusion worse. When you ask your parents or grandparents about your family history, you might be told that your people are native to this land. Or you might be told the complete opposite, that your roots go all the way back to Africa. So which story is true? And who are the real original Black Americans? Throughout this video, we're going to dig deep into these questions. But before we can identify who the true Black Americans are, we first need to understand what separates Native Black Americans from African Americans. We also need to look at the different groups that Black people across America identify with, because that will help us better understand who they really are at their core. Let's start with Native Black Americans. These are people who carry both African and Native American heritage in their bloodline. Their roots connect to various indigenous tribes, including the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole peoples. One of the most important things to understand about this group is that many of them were already living as free people long before slavery became a legal and widespread institution across the United States. This is a key fact that sets them apart from African Americans and gives their story a very different starting point. Within their communities, Native Black Americans played critical roles. They served as warriors, protected tribal lands, and fought to maintain the independence of their tribes. Their unique position in history allowed them to blend African cultural traditions with Native ways of life, creating identities that honored both sides of their heritage at the same time. A powerful example of this is the Seminole tribe, which opened its doors to enslaved people who managed to escape bondage. These freedom seekers, known as Black Seminoles, were fully welcomed into the tribe. They lived as free people, married tribal members, contributed to tribal leadership, and helped the community survive and grow. The bond between Black people and Native Americans in these communities was built on mutual respect and a shared desire to protect one another, not on control or servitude. Now, here is something interesting worth noting. Native Black Americans are themselves widely believed to have originally come from Africa. This lines up with the broadly accepted out of Africa theory, which suggests that all human beings originally came from the African continent before spreading out across the rest of the world. However, for the purpose of this discussion, we will focus on the period of American colonization, during which the Black people already living on this land and those who were brought from Africa were two clearly separate groups with very different histories. This brings us to African Americans. African Americans are the descendants of people who were forcibly taken from Africa and brought to America through the transatlantic slave trade. Their story is one of forced migration, enslavement, and brutal exploitation on a massive scale. Despite all of this, they built a powerful and deeply meaningful identity rooted in the fight for freedom, the pursuit of civil rights, and the creation of a rich cultural expression that combines African heritage with American life and experience. What most clearly separates African Americans from Native Black Americans is their direct connection to the legacy of slavery and the ongoing effects of racial oppression that continued long after slavery was officially abolished. Slavery tore African Americans away from their cultural roots, destroying much of their connection to African languages, traditions, and family ties. Because of this painful history, the term African American was embraced as a way to honor both their African ancestry and their identity as Americans, while also acknowledging the difficult and complex journey that brought them here. Black identity in America has continued to grow and shift, especially since the 1960s. Immigration has brought increasing numbers of Black people from Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe. Many of these individuals do not identify as African American in the traditional sense. First- and second-generation immigrants often hold strong ties to their specific home cultures, whether Jamaican, Nigerian, Haitian, or Ghanaian. At the same time, they connect with the wider Black experience in America and the shared challenges that come along with it. A Jamaican-born man raised in the United States, for example, might describe his identity as fluid, with his blackness being the common thread that ties all parts of who he is together. For people like him, the word black serves as a broader and more inclusive term that recognizes the full global diversity of the black diaspora. To better understand the differences between these groups, we need to look at their cultures more closely. Native Black Americans carry a cultural heritage that is deeply rooted in their tribal origins. Unlike African Americans, whose identity developed through a blending of African and American influences over centuries, Native Black Americans have managed to preserve many indigenous customs, languages, and spiritual practices that go back to their tribes. These traditions, passed carefully from one generation to the next, reflect a long and deep history of Native American life on this continent and clearly distinguish them from African cultural traditions. In many Native Black American communities, tribal ceremonies, spiritual practices, and systems of governance are still very much alive today. Tribes like the Seminole, Cherokee, and Choctaw have kept various rituals going for centuries, rituals designed to honor the land, their ancestors, and the spiritual forces that hold meaning in their world. Black members of these tribes have often participated in and even led these ceremonies, weaving their African roots into Native traditions to create something truly one of a kind. Food is another area where this cultural blending shows up clearly. Traditional Native ingredients like corn, beans, and squash are combined with African-inspired flavors and cooking methods, producing a culinary tradition that is unlike anything else. Language is just as important. Many Native Black Americans have kept parts of their ancestral languages alive through the generations, which sets them apart from African Americans whose original languages were largely silenced or forbidden during slavery. Beyond culture and language, Black Native Americans also held meaningful positions in tribal leadership, influencing decisions around land, trade, and diplomacy. Some even served as spiritual leaders, healers, and guides, cementing their essential place within their communities. African Americans, by contrast, built their cultural identity through survival, resilience, and an unrelenting fight against systemic racism. Over the centuries, African American culture grew out of a blending of African traditions with American life, giving rise to celebrated and influential contributions like jazz music, soul food, and spiritual practices rooted in African religious expression. African American culture is also deeply tied to political activism. The civil rights movement of the 20th century, led by figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, marked a turning point in American history that still resonates today. That spirit of activism lives on through modern movements like Black Lives Matter, which continues the push for justice and equal treatment. Despite their different histories and cultural backgrounds, Native Black Americans and African Americans share many of the same struggles. Both groups have faced systemic racism, discrimination, and exclusion throughout American history. Native Black Americans, because of their African ancestry, were often looked down upon even within their own tribes, while also facing discrimination from the wider society outside tribal boundaries. Laws and social customs frequently stripped them of their tribal status, blocking them from owning land and participating in tribal governance. This left them in a complicated position, seen as outsiders by white society and sometimes treated as lesser within their own communities as well. African Americans, meanwhile, endured the full weight of slavery and everything that followed. Even after emancipation, they faced entrenched racism through Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation and blocked their access to education, housing, jobs, and the right to vote. Both groups know what it means to have their humanity denied simply because of the color of their skin. Over time, the lines between these two communities began to blur. The Great Migration, which took place from the early 1900s through the 1970s, saw millions of African Americans leave the rural South and move to cities in the North and West, searching for better opportunities and an escape from racial violence. As they settled in new areas, they often found themselves living alongside Native Black American communities, and new social and cultural bonds formed. Family stories and oral traditions led many African Americans to claim Native American ancestry, though confirming those connections was rarely easy. Records had been lost, destroyed, or deliberately erased, especially during events like the Trail of Tears and throughout the era of slavery. Despite those challenges, cultural blending happened naturally. African and Native American traditions merged in music, storytelling, and spiritual life. Eventually, the search for answers about ancestry led to the rise of DNA testing. Companies like Ancestry and 23andMe now allow people to explore their genetic roots in detail. Many African Americans have discovered Native American markers in their results, sparking a renewed desire to reconnect with indigenous heritage and reclaim identities that had been lost or forgotten. However, DNA testing has real limitations that are important to understand. Having a Native Black American great-grandparent does not guarantee that their Native American genes will show up in your results. Because of how chromosomes are inherited, certain genetic segments may simply not be passed down. On top of that, genetic databases contain very few reference samples from Native Black Americans, meaning that even when those genes are present, they can easily be missed, misidentified, or incorrectly labeled as African in origin. So, what does it truly mean to be a Black American today? The honest answer is that Black identity in America is not a single, simple thing. It is a rich, layered, and constantly evolving experience shaped by African, indigenous, and many other cultural influences across centuries of history. Whether rooted in tribal lands, shaped by the horrors of slavery, or formed through the immigrant experience, Black identity in America is diverse, complex, and deeply human.